He feigned bankruptcy, sold off the land, and let the house fall into apparent ruin. And when she abandoned him in front of everyone at the New Year's Eve ball, clinging to the arm of that wealthy lawyer from Savannah, no one imagined that this was exactly what he had been waiting for. Can you imagine planning your own public humiliation just to unmask the person who has slept beside you for 12 years? Well, this story happened in the deep countryside of Georgia in December of 1932, when a man decided that revenge would be served cold, calculated, and devastating. Before we continue, I wanted to ask for your help. Write down in the comments where you are watching this story from. What is your city, your state? I love knowing that these tales of old times reach so many different places. And if you are enjoying it, leave a like so the video can grow and reach more people who appreciate stories of truth and overcoming the odds. Now let's get to the story that will keep you glued to the screen until the end. Henry Vance was 48 years old and owned 2,000 acres of prime cotton land in Macon County. He was a man of few words, with broad shoulders belonging to someone who had hauled grain sacks his whole life and calloused hands that smelled of soil even after being washed. His face held deep wrinkles around the eyes, not from laughter, but from the unforgiving sun and sleepless nights calculating harvests. He wore raw cotton shirts, denim trousers, and worn-out work boots that he polished himself every Sunday. Nothing about him screamed wealth, even though the Victory estate produced some of the best bales in the region. Clarissa was the opposite in every way. 34 years old, with pale skin she protected from the sun, with French hats and lace gloves, her wavy black hair always pinned up in elaborate hairstyles that a maid spent hours perfecting. She had come from Atlanta in 1920, the daughter of a bankrupt merchant who saw Henry as the family's financial salvation. The marriage was arranged like so many others, but Clarissa never hid the fact that she accepted it for security, not for love. She wore expensive dresses of imported fabric, jewelry that Henry bought without complaint, and perfume that came from the city and cost the monthly wages of 3 field hands. The first few years had been tolerable. Henry was a fair man, generous even, and Clarissa played the role of the plantation wife with cold efficiency. She received visitors, organized dinners, and supervised the household. They slept in the same room, but in separate beds for 5 years now. He never complained. He worked from dawn until dusk, returned tired, ate dinner in silence, read the newspaper, and slept. She did needlepoint, played the piano, and wrote long letters to friends in the capital, complaining about the boredom of the countryside. The change began in April of 1932. Henry arrived for dinner with a worried expression, a rare thing for him. Clarissa was seated at the head of the long mahogany table, eating pot roast with potatoes that Mrs. Higgins had prepared. The cook, a 60-year-old woman who had worked on the estate since before Clarissa arrived, poured wine with precise movements. Henry sighed deeply before speaking. "The harvest wasn't looking good," he said with a tired voice. "The January frost had damaged the crops. The bowls were small, many plants had died. He calculated losing almost 40% of the expected production." Clarissa raised her eyes from her plate, but didn't seem truly concerned. She asked if this would affect the household expenses. Henry hesitated, wiped his mouth with the embroidered linen napkin. He said they might need to tighten their belts a little in the coming months. Nothing serious, but it was better to be cautious with spending. She didn't answer, just went back to cutting her meat with delicate movements. But Henry noticed the way her lips pursed, the thin line of displeasure that appeared between her perfectly arched eyebrows. May brought more bad news. Henry said that 2 buyers from Savannah had cancelled contracts, claiming that the Great Depression was crashing prices worldwide. He had bales sitting in the warehouse, unable to sell them for the price needed to cover costs. June was even worse. He let go of 3 field hands, claiming he couldn't pay them. The house began to run with fewer staff. Clarissa complained that her personal maid had been sent away, and now who was going to comb her hair? Henry looked at her with a weary expression. He said she could comb her own hair like other women did. Clarissa turned red with rage, throwing her fork onto the plate with a clatter. She hadn't married to live like a peasant, she screamed. Henry didn't argue, just left the room with heavy steps. July was the month he started selling things. First, it was 3 thoroughbred horses he had bought years before. Then it was a 50-acre lot on the northern border of the property, good planting land that he said he sold to pay debts at the bank. Clarissa began to ask more questions to pressure him. How much did he owe? To whom had he sold it? How much money was left? Henry answered in monosyllables, evasive, which only increased her anxiety. Mrs. Higgins watched everything from the kitchen. She was a frail woman, white hair tied in a tight bun, hands that trembled slightly with age, but still cooked like no one else. She had raised Henry since his mother died, giving birth to his younger brother. She knew that man better than anyone, and she knew something didn't add up. Henry was an experienced farmer, cautious, who had saved money since he was young. A bad harvest wouldn't break a man like him. But Mrs. Higgins was discreet, so she just observed, prepared the increasingly simple meals Henry requested, and waited. August arrived with dry winds that kicked up red dust along the estate roads. Henry sold another 100 acres, this time to his own brother Theodore Teddy Vance, who owned a general store in town. The price was low. Everyone commented on it. Henry Vance is desperate, they said at the store, at the warehouse, at church. The man is selling off his father's inheritance for pennies. Clarissa heard the comments when she went to town, returning pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. One night in September she entered his study without knocking. Henry was sitting at the dark wood desk, papers scattered in front of him, a kerosene lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls. She demanded the truth. How much money was left? Were they going to lose everything? Henry took off his reading glasses, rubbed his tired eyes. He said the situation was difficult, but he was doing his possible best. Clarissa crossed her arms, her purple silk dress shining in the dim light. She asked if he expected her to live in poverty. Henry looked at her for a long moment before answering. He said he expected her to be his wife, for richer or for poorer, as they had sworn in church. Clarissa gave a bitter laugh. That was just theatre, she said with disdain. She married a rich planter, not a beggar. If he couldn't sustain the standard she deserved, then perhaps she had made the wrong choice 12 years ago. Henry didn't answer. He just put his glasses back on and returned to his papers. Clarissa left, slamming the door with enough force to make the lamp tremble. October was a month of sparse rains and delayed planting. Henry sold more land, always to Teddy, always for prices that made neighbors shake their heads in pity. The Victory House began to show signs of deliberate neglect. Henry dismissed the caretaker who tended the garden. The rose bushes Clarissa loved so much began to wilt from lack of pruning and water. The main gate's paint started peeling. Broken shingles on the porch roof were not replaced. The stone fountain in the central courtyard dried up, filling with dead leaves. Clarissa was furious, but also frightened. She began to save money in secret, stashing away whatever was left from household expenses. Small amounts she hid in a mother-of-pearl box in her room. She wrote frequent letters to friends in Atlanta, asking about life in the capital, about opportunities, about men. The answers came in scented envelopes she read locked in her room. It was in mid-November that Teddy appeared at the farm. He was a younger man than Henry, 43, thinner, more talkative, with a well-trimmed mustache and the clothes of a successful merchant. The two brothers locked themselves in the office for 3 hours. Muffled voices came through the thick wooden door. Clarissa tried to listen, but couldn't distinguish the words, only Henry's grave tone and Teddy's sharper responses. When Teddy came out, his face was tense. He passed Clarissa in the living room without looking her in the eye, just touched the brim of his hat in a quick greeting and left. Henry appeared minutes later, standing in the office doorway. Clarissa asked what they had talked about. He answered that he had sold more land, the last 150 acres of pasture. Now the estate had only the main house and 50 acres of cotton, less than a sixth of what it was before. Clarissa went white. She asked how much money that amounted to. Henry said it would barely pay the debts. She brought a hand to her chest, breathing fast. And them, how would they live? Henry shrugged. They would have to manage as they could. He still had the house and some cotton. They wouldn't starve, but the days of luxury were over. Clarissa said nothing. She went up to her room, closed the door, and Mrs. Higgins heard muffled crying into the pillow until late at night. December arrived with intense heat and a cloudless sky. The town began preparations for the holidays. The Alston family, owners of the largest plantation in the region with over 1,000 acres, organized a New Year's Eve ball as they did every year. It was the most important social event in the county, with guests coming from Atlanta, Savannah, Macon. Live music, abundant food, fireworks at midnight. All the important farmers and merchants received an invitation. The invitation for the Vance family arrived on December 10th, a thick envelope with a gold crest. Clarissa opened it with trembling hands. She read the card in silence, then looked at Henry. She asked if they were going. Henry was sitting in the armchair in the living room, reading a newspaper 3 days old. He said yes, they were going. Clarissa hesitated before asking if he didn't find it humiliating to appear at the ball the way they were, bankrupt, objects of everyone's pity. Henry lowered the paper, looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. He said he never had foolish pride, and he wasn't going to start now. They were invited. They would attend. If anyone wanted to pity them, let them. He owed explanations to no one. Clarissa spent the following days in a strange agitation. She rummaged through the wardrobe looking for dresses that were still presentable. Most needed repairs, unraveled seams, stains that didn't come out completely. She had to sew them herself, something she hadn't done in years, and her unaccustomed fingers pricked with the needle, leaving dots of blood on the pale fabric. On December 20th, Teddy appeared again. This time he brought news that left Henry apparently shaken. The two talked on the porch, and Clarissa managed to hear part of it. The bank was calling in the debt, Teddy said with a worried voice. They wanted guarantees, titles, something. If Henry didn't pay by the end of January, they would foreclose on the house. Henry ran a hand over his tired face. He said he needed time. Teddy asked how much time he thought the bank would give. Henry didn't know. Clarissa went back inside with her heart racing. The house. They were going to lose even the house. She would be evicted, with nowhere to live, with nothing. The woman from the capital who married a rich planter was going to end up on the street like a beggar. Her hands shook when she went up to her room. She locked the door, opened the mother-of-pearl box, counted the saved money. It wasn't much, perhaps enough for a few weeks in a cheap boarding house in Atlanta. After that, nothing. Fear began to transform into something else in the following days. Anger at Henry for losing everything, anger at herself for betting on him, anger at fate for putting her in that situation. And along with the anger, a thought that started small but grew. She was still beautiful. She was still only 34. She had an education, knew how to behave in society. There were other men, successful men, who could offer her the life she always wanted. She didn't need to sink with Henry. She owed no loyalty to a man who had led her to ruin. New Year's Eve dawned hot and humid. Henry spent the day tending to what remained of the crops, returning in the late afternoon, covered in red clay dust. Clarissa was already getting ready, locked in her room for hours. When she came down for dinner, Henry was at the table in his usual clothes, dirty from work. She asked if he wasn't going to dress up for the ball. Henry looked at her, noting the dark blue dress she had mended, her hair pinned with simple grips since there was no maid, the pearl necklace that was one of the last jewels remaining. He said he was going to bathe and change, but she shouldn't expect elegance. He didn't have new suits anymore. He was going to use the black suit from his cousin's wedding in 1928, which was tight and smelled of mothballs. They left when the sun was already setting, dyeing the sky orange and blood red. They went in the old buggy pulled by a single horse, no longer the beautiful carriage with 4 horses they used before. The road to the Alston estate took almost 2 hours, a potholed dirt track that shook the buggy, making their bones ache. Clarissa sat in silence, gripping the bench, eyes fixed on the horizon. Henry drove with firm reins, a neutral expression, as if he were going to just another day of work. The Alston estate was everything the Victory estate wasn't anymore. A huge 2-story house painted immaculate white, perfectly tended gardens with flowing fountains, Japanese lanterns hanging from the trees creating magical lighting. Elegant carriages arrived one after another, disembarking men in tailcoats and women in expensive dresses with sequins reflecting the light. Music from violins and a piano spilled out through the open windows. Laughter and animated conversations filled the air scented with jasmine and roses. Henry stopped the modest buggy on the side, where the simpler vehicles were kept. He helped Clarissa down, offered his arm. She hesitated before accepting, her cold fingers on the worn fabric of his sleeve. They walked to the main entrance, climbing the marble steps where the owner of the house, Colonel Alston, received the guests. He was a man of 60-something, prominent belly, white beard well trimmed, small eyes that missed nothing. The colonel greeted Henry with a firm but brief handshake. "My sympathies for the difficult situation, Vance," he said, with a voice that tried to be supportive but carried poorly disguised satisfaction. "Every man has his struggles, but I hope you resolve them soon." Henry just nodded, thanked him for the invitation, and entered with Clarissa. The main ballroom was spacious, with waxed floorboards reflecting the light of 3 crystal chandeliers. Tables with white cloths along the sides were loaded with food, silver platters with roast meats, pies, sweets, crystallized fruits. Waiters circulated with trays of French champagne and Portuguese wine. An orchestra of 6 musicians played a waltz in a corner, and several couples were already dancing in the center of the room. Henry and Clarissa's entrance caused a momentary silence. Heads turned, glances darted from the couple to discreet whispers. "There's Vance," someone murmured. "Poor devil, lost almost everything. His wife must be ashamed. She was always vain, that one. I bet she'll leave him as soon as a better opportunity appears." Clarissa heard the whispers, or at least imagined she heard them. Her cheeks turned red, but she lifted her chin, tried to maintain a dignified posture. Henry seemed oblivious to everything, greeting acquaintances with nods, taking 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter. They stood at the side of the room, sipping slowly. A few people came to greet them, more out of politeness than a real desire to talk. The women looked at Clarissa's mended dress with pity or disdain, depending on their nature. The men patted Henry on the shoulder, saying things would improve, but their eyes showed they didn't believe it. It was almost 10 at night when he arrived. Robert Stevens, Esquire, entered the room with the bearing of someone accustomed to being noticed. 41 years old, tall, broad shoulders, a dark grey suit of perfect cut that could only have been tailor-made in Atlanta or even New York. Black hair slicked back with pomade, a fine, well-drawn mustache, brown eyes that examined the room with quiet confidence. He carried a cane with a silver handle that he didn't need for walking, only for elegance. A gold watch gleamed on his wrist when he gestured, greeting the colonel. Teddy, who had arrived earlier and was circulating through the room, approached Henry. He murmured discreetly who the newcomer was. "Robert Stevens, a lawyer from Savannah," he said in a low voice. "Just moved to the region, Bought the old retired judge's house. They say he's very wealthy, works for cotton exporters and European companies. Bachelor, never married. The colonel invited him because he wants him to handle some land disputes. Henry nodded slowly, his eyes following Robert as he crossed the room greeting people, and then it happened. Robert stopped talking. His gaze swept the room and landed on Clarissa. She was standing near the dessert table, looking at her own almost empty glass of champagne. The light from the chandelier fell upon her, highlighting her black hair, the pale skin exposed by the neckline of her dress, the graceful curve of her neck. Robert stood still for a moment, clearly impressed. Then he said something to the man he was talking to and began to walk in her direction. Henry saw everything. He saw the moment Robert approached Clarissa, the way he bowed slightly in reverence, the charming smile that opened on his face. He saw Clarissa raise her eyes, the initial surprise, and then something that passed quickly across her expression. Interest. Hope. Robert introduced himself with a modulated voice that carried a slight city accent. He said he didn't know everyone in the region yet. Asked if she could tell him who some of the people present were. Clarissa hesitated, looked to where Henry was with Teddy. Henry raised his glass to her, a gesture that could mean permission or indifference. Clarissa turned her attention back to Robert and began to talk. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. Henry watched from afar, noting every detail. The way Clarissa laughed at Robert's jokes, a laugh he hadn't heard in years. How she tilted her head when listening, a gesture of interest and coquetry that women do without realizing. How her eyes shone when Robert spoke of Savannah, of life in the port city, of the theaters and restaurants. How she touched his arm lightly when she asked a question about the house he had bought. Teddy was tense beside Henry. He murmured that perhaps it was time to intervene, go get Clarissa, dance with her. Henry shook his head. Let it be, he said simply. Let it happen. Teddy looked at his brother with a confused expression, but didn't insist. Half an hour later, Robert invited Clarissa to dance. She accepted without looking at Henry. The two went to the center of the room where the orchestra was playing a slow waltz. Robert placed his hand on her waist with a familiarity improper for someone he had just met. Clarissa didn't pull away. On the contrary, she seemed to lean in closer. They danced well together, movements synchronized, eyes fixed on one another. The whispers restarted around the room, now louder, more scandalous. Look at Vance's wife. She doesn't even hide it. Just met the lawyer, and she's already offering herself. The husband standing there seeing everything. What a shame! What a lack of decency! Henry must be dying of humiliation. But when anyone looked at Henry, his expression was strangely calm. He drank champagne slowly, chatted quietly with Teddy, didn't seem disturbed. Some interpreted it as the resignation of a defeated man who had lost everything, including his dignity. Others thought it weird, unnatural. A man shouldn't be so serene watching his wife in the arms of another. The waltz ended, but Clarissa and Robert continued talking in the center of the room. He said something that made her laugh out loud, a crystalline sound that cut across the space. Then he offered his arm, and they went out to the veranda where lanterns illuminated gardens scented with jasmine. Henry finally moved. He walked to the drinks table, took a fresh glass of champagne. An acquaintance, a neighboring farmer, approached with an embarrassed expression. "Vance," he said hesitantly, "maybe you should, your wife is—" Henry looked at him with eyes that revealed nothing. "My wife is talking to a guest," he said with a tranquil voice. "I see no problem in that." The farmer was left speechless, murmured an apology, and moved away quickly. Midnight was approaching. The orchestra stopped for a break, and the waiters began to serve supper. Tables were set up in the garden, candles lit, creating romantic lighting. Clarissa and Robert were seated together at a secluded table, untouched plates in front of them, absorbed in conversation. He held her hand across the table, a bold and scandalous gesture. She didn't withdraw her hand. Henry sat alone at a table inside the ballroom. Teddy had gone to get food, but Henry wasn't hungry. He just watched through the open window the couple in the garden, the wife he had known for 12 years, transforming into a stranger before his eyes. 5 minutes remained until midnight, when Clarissa finally came back inside. Her face was flushed, eyes bright, hair slightly disheveled. Robert came right behind, a satisfied smile on his face. They separated only when they got close to where Henry was, and even then they maintained gazes that said a lot. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. People gathered, couples joined together, glasses were raised. 7, 6, 5. Clarissa was beside Henry, but she didn't look at him. Her eyes sought Robert on the other side of the room. 4, 3, 2. Fireworks began to burst outside, explosions of colored light illuminating the night. 1. Happy New Year. People hugged, kissed, shouted greetings. Clarissa turned to Henry, extended her hand formally. Happy 1933, she said with a cold voice. Henry shook his wife's hand, held it for a prolonged moment. Happy New Year, Clarissa, he replied. May this year bring everyone exactly what they deserve. She didn't understand the meaning of the words. She pulled her hand away, moved off quickly, went to look for Robert among the festive crowd. She found him near the veranda, and he opened his arms. She entered the embrace with the naturalness of someone who had already decided everything. Their lips met in a kiss that wasn't appropriate for married people, that wasn't discreet, that was being seen by at least 30 people around them. The scandal was consummated. The bankrupt farmer's wife had just kissed the rich lawyer in front of all local society. Henry Vance was ending the year of 1932 as the most humiliated man in the region, or at least that was what everyone thought. January 2nd, 1933 dawned with a sky heavy with grey clouds that promised rain but delivered no relief. The heat was humid, sticky, the kind that makes clothes cling to the body and sweat run down the back even when standing in the shade. Henry woke up early as always, the space beside him empty, because Clarissa hadn't returned home the night before. She had stayed at the Alston estate, claiming it was too late for the return trip, that she had accepted the hostess's hospitality to sleep in the guest room. Henry knew it was a lie. He had seen the way she and Robert said goodbye around 3 in the morning, hands intertwined for far too long, whispered words he couldn't hear but could imagine. Still, he returned alone in the buggy, driving through the dark roads lit only by the waning moon and the lanterns swaying on the vehicle's side hook. Mrs. Higgins was already in the kitchen when he came down. The old cook was preparing strong black coffee, the intense smell filling the room of whitewashed walls, soot-stained from the wood stove. She didn't ask where Clarissa was, just poured the cup of coffee and placed warm cornbread and butter, made the day before, in front of Henry. He ate in silence, looking out the open window where chickens scratched in the yard and the rooster crowed, announcing the day even with the dark sky. "Henry, boy," Mrs. Higgins asked with a voice raspy with age and worry, "are you all right?" He raised his eyes to her, to that woman who had raised him, who knew his every thought before he even formed words. "I'm great, Mrs. Higgins," he answered with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything is going exactly as I planned." The cook shook her head, went back to the stove where she stirred a pot of beans. "I hope you know what you're doing," she murmured. "Revenge is a dish that can poison the one who serves it." Henry didn't answer, just finished his coffee and went out to tend to what remained of the crops. Clarissa arrived shortly after 10 in the morning. An elegant carriage stopped in front of the house, and she stepped down with help from Robert, who had insisted on bringing her personally. The two stood talking for long minutes at the door, and anyone passing on the road could see the intimacy between them, the way their bodies leaned toward each other. how their hands touched even in broad daylight. Henry was in the study when he heard the front door open and close. Quick steps went up the stairs, and then the sound of drawers being opened and closed in Clarissa's room. He didn't move, just continued looking at the papers scattered on the desk, numbers that meant nothing because they were all fake, debts that didn't exist, sales that were theatre. She took almost 2 hours. Henry heard when she came down again, dragging something heavy down the steps. He got up, left the study, met her in the hallway with 2 large leather suitcases and a hat box. Her face was pale but determined, lips pressed in a thin line of made-up resolve. They looked at each other for a moment that seemed to stretch. Henry leaned against the doorframe, crossed his arms, waited. Clarissa took a deep breath, raised her chin in that gesture of false courage he knew well. "I'm leaving," she said, with a voice that tried to be firm but trembled at the edges. "I can't live like this anymore, Henry. I can't stay in a place that is falling to pieces with a man who lost everything, who has no future to offer me." Henry nodded slowly. "Where are you going?" he asked, with a calm, almost curious voice. Clarissa hesitated, fingers gripping the suitcase handle with a force that turned her knuckles white. "I'm going to Savannah," she finally answered. "Robert Stevens offered me shelter, said he can help me start my life over. He is a successful man, Henry, a man who knows how to take care of a woman like I deserve to be taken care of." "Are you sure that's what you want?" Henry asked. There was no accusation in his voice, just a simple question asking for an honest answer. Clarissa blinked rapidly, wiped a tear that threatened to fall. "I'm sure," she said. "I never loved you, Henry. You always knew that. I married for security, for comfort. Now that there is neither, it makes no sense for me to stay. It would be a lie. It would be theatre. At least now I'm being honest." Henry remained silent for a long moment. Then he nodded again. "All right," he said. "If it's what you want, you can go. I won't stop you. I just wanted you to know one thing." Clarissa looked at him with a confused expression. "What?" she asked. Henry gave a sad little smile. "That you will regret this," he replied. "Not today. Maybe not even next month, but one day you will look back and understand what you lost, and then it will be too late." Clarissa gave a bitter laugh. "What did I lose, Henry? A house falling apart? A bankrupt husband? A life of deprivation? Thank you, but I prefer what I'm gaining." She grabbed the suitcases, began to drag them to the door. Henry didn't offer help, just stood watching. At the door, she turned one last time. "Goodbye, Henry," she said. "I hope you manage to get back on your feet one day." He didn't answer, and she left, closing the door behind her with a final sound that echoed through the empty house. Through the window, Henry saw Robert help her put the suitcases in the carriage, saw how he held her waist to help her up, saw the kiss they exchanged before the carriage departed, kicking up red dust along the road. Mrs. Higgins came to stand beside him, wiping her hands on her raw cotton apron. "She's gone then," she said with a neutral voice. "Gone," Henry confirmed, "and she won't be coming back. At least not the way she left." And the news spread through the region with impressive speed. By the next day, everyone knew that Clarissa Vance had abandoned her husband to live with the rich lawyer from Savannah. The comments were malicious, full of false indignation and real satisfaction. "What a shame," the women said at the market. "A married woman running off with another man. It just isn't done." "She was always a gold digger," the men commented at the general store. Now that Vance lost the money, she jumped ship like a rat leaving a sinking vessel. If you are enjoying this story of revenge and truth, leave a like to help the channel grow and reach more people. Henry endured the looks of pity, the comments people made thinking he couldn't hear. He continued his routine as if nothing had happened, waking early, tending the crops, returning late. The house was quieter now, just him and Mrs. Higgins, but it was a more honest silence than the one that existed when Clarissa lived there. It was a week later that Teddy appeared. It was late afternoon, the sun setting in an explosion of oranges and reds that dyed the low clouds. The two brothers sat on the porch, bottles of bourbon that Teddy had brought sitting on the rustic wooden table. They drank in silence for a few minutes, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. Teddy finally broke the silence. "You did it," he said with a voice that mixed admiration and unease. "She left exactly as you predicted." Henry refilled his glass, the amber liquid shining in the dim twilight. "I said she would," he replied. "People like Clarissa are predictable. They always follow the money, the comfort, the easiest path. It was just a matter of creating the right situation." Teddy took a long sip before continuing. "Are you going to tell me now how it all started? How you found out?" Henry looked at the horizon for a prolonged moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then he sighed and began to speak. "It was in March of last year," he recounted in a low voice. He had gone to Atlanta to resolve bank matters, business related to the harvest sale. Clarissa said she was going along, that she wanted to visit friends and go shopping. Henry accepted without suspicion, dropped her at the hotel where they usually stayed, and went to take care of business. He finished earlier than expected, returned to the hotel in the mid-afternoon. The doorman said Clarissa had left in the morning and hadn't returned yet. Henry had free time, so he decided to walk through the city. Atlanta was growing fast, new buildings going up everywhere, frantic movement of cars and trams on the wide streets. He was passing in front of an elegant cafe on Peachtree Street when he saw something that made his heart stop. Clarissa sitting at a table in the back, and on the other side, a man he didn't know. Young, well-dressed, smiling with an intimacy that only comes from a long relationship. Henry stood on the sidewalk, shielded by a lamppost, watching. He saw how she laughed at the man's jokes, how she tilted her head in that flirtatious way, how she touched his hand across the table. "The same thing she did with Robert at the ball," Teddy murmured. "Exactly the same thing," Henry confirmed. "She has patterns, ways of acting that she repeats. I realized that on that day." Henry didn't enter the cafe, didn't make a scene. He just returned to the hotel, waited. Clarissa arrived close to 7 in the evening, shopping bags in her hands, face flushed, eyes bright. She said she had spent the day with friends, that it had been a wonderful day. Henry asked which friend, and she answered without hesitation, a name invented on the spot which he realized was a lie by the way she averted her gaze when speaking. In the following days, Henry hired a discreet private investigator. It wasn't hard to find one in the capital, men who did this type of work for suspicious husbands. The investigator followed Clarissa the next 3 times she went to Atlanta. The report that came back confirmed the worst. She had a lover for almost 2 years, a man named Frank Lawson, an employee at an exchange house, well off but not rich. They met whenever Clarissa went to the capital, sometimes in cafes, sometimes in a discreet hotel room he rented. "But the worst wasn't the betrayal itself," Henry continued, his voice hardening. "It was what the investigator discovered when he dug deeper. Clarissa was siphoning money from me for over a year. Small amounts she took from household expenses, jewelry she claimed to have lost, but actually sold, even amounts she forged my signature to withdraw from the bank. It all went to Frank. She was financing her lover with my money." Teddy slammed his empty glass on the table with force. "That viper," he said with genuine anger. "And you didn't confront her, didn't make a scene." Henry shook his head. "No," he answered, "because a scene would resolve nothing. She would deny it, cry, maybe even admit it, but ask for forgiveness. And then what? I forgive her and stay with a woman who betrayed and robbed me? Or throw her out and look like a man whose wife abandoned him because he was cruel? Either way, I lost." "That was when you created the plan," Teddy said, not a question but a statement. "It was," Henry confirmed. "I spent nights without sleep thinking, planning every detail. I realized the only way to win was to make her destroy herself, to reveal her true nature for everyone to see. I needed to create a situation where she would make decisions that showed who she really was. The plan was simple, but required patience. Henry began to feign financial difficulties in April, right after discovering the betrayal. He invented a bad harvest, buyers cancelling contracts, debts at the bank. None of it was true. The harvest was excellent. He had money saved, no real debts. But he began selling land, always to Teddy, who was in on the plan from the beginning, always for absurdly low prices that made everyone think he was desperate. The money from the fake sales was saved, Teddy explained, taking over the narrative. Every cent is deposited in a bank in Atlanta, in an account in Henry's name that no one but us two knows exists. The lands remain legally his, only transferred on paper to my name. We can reverse everything with a signature whenever he wants. Henry nodded. The goal was to create the perfect illusion of a man losing everything. I fired staff, let the house get sloppy on purpose, started wearing worn-out clothes, even though I had a wardrobe full of good items stored away. Every detail was calculated to make Clarissa believe I was bankrupt, and it worked better than I expected. But you didn't count on the lawyer showing up, Teddy said. Henry gave a small smile. I didn't count on Robert specifically, he admitted, but I knew someone would show up. A woman like Clarissa always finds a substitute when the current one no longer serves. It could have been a rich merchant, another farmer, an army officer. The important thing wasn't who, but that she would make the decision to leave of her own free will, in front of everyone, proving she was gold-digging and characterless. And now, Teddy asked, refilling the glasses again. She's gone. The public humiliation happened. Is the plan complete? Henry looked at his brother with an expression Teddy couldn't completely decipher. The plan is just beginning, he replied. The first phase was making her reveal who she is. The second phase is ensuring she faces all the consequences of what she did. Teddy tensed up. Henry, what are you planning? Henry drank the rest of the bourbon, felt the liquid burn down his throat. I'm going to expose everything, he said, with a calm but firm voice. The betrayal with Frank, the money she stole, every lie she told. I'm going to publish it in the newspapers in Atlanta and Savannah. I'm going to spread the truth through the whole region. When I'm done, Clarissa won't be able to find a place anywhere, and dear Mr. Robert is going to discover what kind of woman he sheltered in his house. But isn't that too cruel? Teddy asked with a hesitant voice. She's already been humiliated, already lost everything. Do you need to destroy her completely? Henry turned to his brother, and for the first time Teddy saw real rage in his eyes. She betrayed me, robbed me, played me for a fool for 2 years, then abandoned me at the first better opportunity without even looking back. And you think I'm being cruel? She deserves every consequence she's going to face. The two sat in silence while night fell completely, only the sound of crickets and frogs starting the nocturnal chorus. Teddy finally spoke again, and afterwards, when everything is finished, when she's destroyed, will you be able to move on? Or will the revenge consume you too? Henry didn't answer immediately. He looked at the stars starting to appear in the dark sky, constellations his father had taught him to identify when he was a child. I will rebuild my life, he said finally. I will reverse the fake sales, restore the farm, find someone worth the effort. But before that, I need to finish what I started. I need to guarantee that justice is done. Teddy nodded slowly, recognizing he wouldn't be able to dissuade his brother. I just hope you know where to stop, he said with real concern. Revenge can be a poison that kills both the target and the one who administers it. Meanwhile, in Savannah, Clarissa was starting her new life. The port city was different from the interior in every way. Tall buildings, busy streets with electric trams, elegant shops, French restaurants, a theatre with performances coming from Europe. The air smelled of salt and fish, seagulls cried over the rooftops, ship whistles sounded in the harbour constantly. Robert lived in a beautiful house in an elegant neighbourhood near the water. 2 stories, a brick facade in the colonial style, a well-tended garden with palmetto trees, a wrought-iron gate. He had servants, a cook, a driver with a shining black Ford automobile, the life Clarissa always dreamed of, the comfort she thought she deserved. The first days were magical. Robert treated her like a princess, took her to dinners at expensive restaurants, strolls along the waterfront, bought new dresses and jewellery that shone more than anything Henry had given her. He was attentive, charming, present in ways Henry never was. Clarissa convinced herself she had made the right choice, that she was finally living the life she was born to have. But small things began to bother her. Robert was possessive in a way that at first seemed romantic, but soon became suffocating. He asked where she went, who she spoke to, why she took so long at the store. When she complained, he said it was because he loved her so much, because he was jealous of losing her. Clarissa accepted the explanation, but something in her remained unsettled. There was also the question of social standing. Robert was respected in Savannah, but Clarissa was in his house without being married, which created a delicate situation. He couldn't take her to certain events, couldn't present her officially. She was a kept woman, a mistress, not a legitimate wife. When she mentioned marriage, Robert changed the subject, saying it was too soon, that they needed to wait for her divorce to be finalized first, that they had time. January turned into February, and the novelty was losing its shine. Clarissa began to miss stupid things from the countryside, the silence of the night, broken only by crickets, not by ships and trams, the coffee Mrs. Higgins made, strong and bitter the way she had liked to drink it for 12 years, even the porch of the Victory House, old and with peeling paint, where she sat on hot afternoons. She pushed these thoughts away with anger at herself. She couldn't miss that place falling to pieces, that man who had lost everything. It was in the 3rd week of February that everything began to crumble. Robert arrived home mid-afternoon with a folded newspaper in his hand and a closed expression. He found Clarissa in the living room embroidering a cushion, an activity she resumed more out of boredom than interest. He threw the newspaper on the coffee table with a force that made her jump. "We need to talk," he said with a hard voice she had never heard before. Clarissa picked up the newspaper with trembling hands. It was the Atlanta Constitution, an important paper that arrived in Savannah every morning. On page 3, there was a small but devastating article. The headline read, "Wife abandons bankrupt, farmer for rich lawyer, but what was she hiding?" Clarissa turned white reading the first lines. The article told everything: the betrayal with Frank Lawson that lasted 2 years, the siphoned money, the lies. Even transcriptions of letters between her and Frank that Henry's investigator must have obtained. At the end of the article, there was a note saying that Farmer Henry Vance wished to make clear that the supposed bankruptcy was an exaggeration, that he had merely gone through a difficult moment but maintained properties and resources, that he exposed the truth about his ex-wife's character as a service to society, so that other men wouldn't be deceived as he was. "Are you going to explain this to me?" Robert asked with an icy voice. "Or is it all true?" Clarissa tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Her throat was closed with panic. "This isn't... I can explain... It's not how it looks," she managed to stutter finally. Robert gave a bitter laugh. "Not how it looks. It's written here in black and white. You had a lover, stole from your husband, abandoned him not because he was bankrupt, but because I appeared with more money. I was just a pawn in your game. It wasn't like that. Clarissa tried to argue with tears running down her face. I was unhappy. Henry never really loved me. Frank was a mistake I made, but it was already over before I met you. Robert shook his head. I don't care, he said cuttingly. What interests me is that now my reputation is stained. I'm the lawyer who stole a married woman, who sheltered a thief and a liar. My clients will question my character. My colleagues will laugh at me. You destroyed me. Clarissa fell to her knees, grabbed his legs. Robert, please don't abandon me. I have nowhere to go. I have no one. I promise I'll fix it. I'll do anything. He pulled away with disgust, as if her touch burned. You have until tomorrow morning to get out of my house, he said with absolute coldness. Take your things and vanish from my life. And pray I don't sue you for damages to my reputation. He left the room, stomping hard, went up to his room, locked the door. Clarissa stayed on the floor, crying until the maid came to ask if she needed anything. The maid's look was one of poorly disguised contempt. The news had already spread through the house, and soon would spread through all of Savannah. The night was the longest of Clarissa's life. She packed suitcases again, now with hands trembling so much she could barely fold the clothes. Where would she go? She couldn't go back to Henry's house. The humiliation would be too great. She couldn't go to her family in Atlanta. They were ashamed of her, and even so didn't have the resources to support her. Her friends in the capital had certainly already read the newspaper. None would want to receive her now. Frank would probably deny even knowing her if she appeared. When the sun rose, Clarissa was sitting in the living room with suitcases ready beside her. Robert came down for breakfast, didn't even look in her direction. The driver will take you to the train station, he said without emotion. From there on, you are your own problem. Clarissa swallowed her pride one more time. Robert, give me at least some money. I need to survive until I can get organized. He stopped, turned slowly. Money, he repeated with a voice dangerously low. You want me to give you money after everything? Clarissa nodded desperately. Please, just enough for a few weeks. Robert took a wallet from his pocket, grabbed a few bills, threw them on the floor at her feet. $50, he said. More than that you don't deserve. Clarissa picked up the money with shattered dignity, put it in her purse. Thank you, she murmured. Robert turned his back. Don't thank me, he said, and never come back. You are dead to me. And the driver took Clarissa to the station in awkward silence. She got out of the car, took the suitcases, stood on the platform, not knowing which train to take. To where? The only answer she could think of was to go back. Go back and ask for forgiveness. Go back and beg. Go back and accept any humiliation because she had no choice. But while she waited for the train, she imagined Henry's expression when he saw her, the coldness in his eyes, the satisfaction hidden by manners. And she knew he would say no, that this was part of the revenge, to leave her with nowhere, with no one, completely destroyed. And Clarissa realized too late that she had completely underestimated the quiet man who slept beside her for 12 years. The train whistled entering the small station of the village near Macon on a March afternoon. 3 months had passed since that morning in Savannah when Clarissa was kicked out of Robert's house with $50 and 2 suitcases of expensive clothes that now served for nothing. 3 months living in cheap boarding houses in Atlanta, eating little, wearing the same dresses until they were worn, seeing the money run out slowly until nothing remained. She stepped off the train carrying only a small suitcase now. The other had been sold, along with most of the clothes, to pay for food and shelter. The silk dresses had gone for ridiculous prices. The jewelry Robert gave was pawned one by one until none were left. The face that was beautiful and well cared for was now too thin, with deep circles under the eyes and skin without the shine of before. The hair that a maid combed with care was tied in a simple and poorly made bun. The hands that never worked were rough from washing clothes in a dirty boarding house. Clarissa stood on the station platform, looking around as if seeing everything for the first time. The small town with whitewashed houses, the main church with a single spire in the distance, Wagons passing, kicking up red dust, the smell of earth and horse manure. 3 months ago, this all seemed primitive, unbearable. Now it seemed like a home she had lost through stupidity and greed. She picked up the suitcase, started walking along the dirt road in the direction of the Victory estate. It was almost 3 miles. The afternoon sun burned without mercy, but she didn't have money to pay for a ride. Her feet ached in boots that were elegant, but not made for walking long distances. Sweat ran down her back, sticking the simple grey dress to her skin. Her throat was dry, but she kept walking with a determination born of desperation. A few people passed and recognized her. Curious glances, muffled whispers, but no one offered help. Her story was known to everyone now, the woman who abandoned her husband for a rich lawyer and was then abandoned when the truth about her character came to light. An object of gossip, an example of what not to do, a living moral lesson. Clarissa held her head up, feigning dignity she didn't feel, kept walking. When she arrived at the entrance to the Victory estate, the sun was already low on the horizon, dyeing everything gold. Clarissa stopped at the wooden gate, her hand trembling when she pushed. The gate creaked on rusty hinges, a sound she heard 1,000 times, but that now seemed different, ominous. She began to walk up the driveway flanked by ancient trees, and it was then that she noticed something strange. The farm wasn't falling to pieces as it was when she left. On the contrary, the path was clean, without weeds growing on the sides. The fences were mended, new wood replacing the rotten. In the distance, she saw field hands working in the cotton fields, more men than there were when she lived there. And when the main house appeared in the curve of the path, Clarissa stopped, breath caught in her throat. The house was renovated. Fresh white paint on the walls, new shingles replacing the broken ones, windows with clean glass shining in the twilight, a tended garden with blooming roses, the stone fountain functioning again with running water. It wasn't a palace like Robert's house, but it was beautiful, solid, prosperous. It was everything it had been before Henry started the theatre of bankruptcy. Clarissa felt her legs weaken. He had lied. He had pretended to be losing everything, but he had never lost anything. It was all staging, an elaborate plan to make her reveal her true nature. And she had fallen into the trap like an idiot, had done exactly what he expected. The humiliation she felt when Robert kicked her out was nothing compared to what she felt now, realizing she had been manipulated from start to finish. She forced her legs to move, climbed the porch steps with hesitant strides. The front door was ajar, voices coming from inside. Clarissa recognized Henry's deep voice, talking to someone, and then a feminine laugh she didn't know. Young, clear, joyful, a sound this house never heard when she lived there. Clarissa pushed the door slowly. The entry hall was clean, smelling of beeswax and fresh flowers. New pictures on the walls, a rug she didn't recognize covering the wooden floor. Voices came from the dining room, and she walked in that direction as if in a trance. At the dining room door, Clarissa stopped. The mahogany table she knew was set for dinner, white embroidered cloth, fine china that Henry kept only for special occasions, candles lit even though there was still daylight. Henry was seated at the head, but he wasn't the same Henry she left 3 months ago. He wore a well-cut suit, hair trimmed with care, had even gained a little weight filling out the face that was gaunt before. He looked 10 years younger, a prosperous and confident man. On the other side of the table was a woman Clarissa had never seen. Maybe 28 years old, beautiful with a simple and natural beauty. Brown hair tied in a thick braid, modest light blue dress, but clean, face without makeup, but with a genuine smile that lit up her brown eyes. She was laughing at something Henry had said, and he smiled back with an expression Clarissa never saw directed at her in 12 years of marriage. Real affection, human warmth, happiness. Mrs. Higgins entered from the kitchen carrying a platter of roast chicken, and it was she who noticed Clarissa first. The old cook stopped mid-step, her expression passing from surprise to something that could be pity or satisfaction. Hard to tell. "Henry," she said with a controlled voice, "you have a visitor." Henry raised his eyes, and when he saw Clarissa in the doorway, his expression didn't change. He didn't show surprise, anger, satisfaction, or pity. He just looked at her with calm eyes, as if he were seeing just any person, without special importance. The young woman also looked, confusion appearing on her face. "Clarissa," Henry said finally, voice polite but cold, "I didn't expect your visit." Clarissa swallowed hard, forced the words out. "Henry, I need to talk to you, please." He exchanged a look with the young woman, then nodded slightly. "All right," he said. "Marianne, can you excuse me for a few minutes?" The woman hesitated, then stood up with graceful movements. "Of course," she answered with a soft voice that had a country accent. "I'll help Mrs. Higgins in the kitchen." Marianne passed Clarissa in the doorway, and Clarissa felt the difference between them like a slap in the face. Marianne smelled of simple soap and rosewater, had calloused hands of someone who works. A dress she probably sewed herself. But she carried a natural dignity that didn't come from expensive clothes or jewelry. It came from inside, from knowing who she was and being at peace with it. Everything Clarissa never had. When they were alone, Henry didn't get up, didn't offer a chair. He just waited with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world. Clarissa entered the room, let the suitcase fall to the floor. The words she had rehearsed during the whole walk vanished from her head. She just looked around, seeing the restored house, the plentiful table, the prosperous life he had rebuilt so quickly. "You lied," she said finally, voice coming out more accusatory than she intended. "You were never bankrupt. It was all a lie to trick me." Henry tilted his head slightly. "Yes," he confirmed without trying to deny. "It was all a lie. Just as your marriage to me was a lie, your love was a lie, your fidelity was a lie. I realized that to deal with a liar, I needed to use her own weapons against her." Clarissa felt tears burn in her eyes. "You destroyed me," she whispered. "Exposed me in the newspapers, ruined my reputation, left me with nothing. How could you be so cruel?" Henry finally stood up but didn't approach. He stayed behind the chair, hands resting on the carved wooden backrest. "Cruel," he repeated the word slowly. "You betrayed me for 2 years, Clarissa. Stole my money to give to your lover. Used me as a bank while looking for a better substitute, then abandoned me publicly thinking I was broke without even looking back. And I am the one who was cruel." If you enjoyed this story so far, leave a like on the video so more people can know these tales that show how the truth always comes to light. Clarissa fell to her knees on the polished wooden floor, hands clasped in supplication. "I was wrong," she admitted with sobs cutting the words. "I was wrong badly. I was terrible. I don't deserve forgiveness. But Henry, please, don't leave me on the street. I have nowhere to go. I have no one. I'm hungry, cold, alone. For the love you had for me once, give me at least a place to sleep, food, anything." Henry looked at her for a long moment. "Love," he said finally. "You think I loved you?" Clarissa raised her face wet with tears. "In the beginning, yes. You must have loved at least a little." Henry shook his head slowly. "No, Clarissa, I never loved you. I married you because my father wanted a union with a merchant family from the capital, because it was a convenient deal. I respected you, treated you well, fulfilled my role as a husband. But love? No, love is what I am starting to feel for Marianne, a woman who respects me, who works beside me, who is honest. What I had for you was tolerance, and even that ended when I discovered your betrayals." The words were cruel, but spoken with a calm that made them worse. Clarissa felt as if she were being stripped layer by layer until nothing was left. "Please," she tried again. Just a place in the house. I can work, I can cook, clean, anything. You don't need to treat me as a wife, you can treat me as a maid. Just don't let me starve on the street." Henry walked to the window, looked out where the twilight painted the sky purple and pink. "When I planned all this," he said with a low voice, "I imagined this moment. You coming back defeated, begging forgiveness. I thought I would feel satisfaction, that revenge would be sweet." He turned to face her. "But do you know what I feel looking at you now? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You are a stranger to me, Clarissa. Part of my past that means nothing anymore." "Then help me at least with money," Clarissa implored. "I know you have it. I know you saved everything. Give me enough to start over in another place, far from here." Henry returned to the chair, sat down, poured wine from the crystal decanter. "Why should I?" he asked, genuinely curious. "You stole from me, betrayed me, humiliated me publicly. Why would I give you a cent?" "Because you are a better man than I am a woman," Clarissa answered with desperate honesty. "Because you have a conscience, morals, decency. Because even hating me, you aren't cruel." Henry drank the wine slowly, savoring it. "You are wrong," he said. "I am cruel, very cruel. The difference is that my cruelty is calculated, deserved, just. I don't waste it on innocent people. But on those who hurt me, on them, I have no pity at all." Mrs. Higgins appeared at the door, Marianne right behind with a worried expression. "Henry," the young woman said with a soft voice, "sorry to interrupt, but don't you want me to prepare a plate for the lady? She seems to need food." Marianne pointed to Clarissa, still kneeling on the floor, thin and pale. Henry looked at Marianne, and his expression softened, seeing the genuine kindness in her face. This was the difference between Marianne and Clarissa, he realized. Marianne saw a suffering person and wanted to help, even without knowing who it was, even though it could be an enemy. Clarissa saw a suffering person and calculated how to use that for her own benefit. "You are too good, Marianne," he said with real affection. "But no, she won't be staying for dinner." He turned to Clarissa again. "I'm going to do one thing for you," he said. "One single thing, and then I want you to vanish from my life forever." Clarissa nodded frantically. "Anything, whatever you want." Henry opened a drawer in the china cabinet, took out a thick envelope. "Here is $100, he said, throwing the envelope on the floor near her. "It's twice what you stole from me during that year and a half. Consider the debt paid." Clarissa picked up the envelope with trembling hands. $100 was money, not a fortune, but enough for several months living modestly, maybe even to start something small in a distant city. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Henry." He raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't finish," he said with a hard voice. "This isn't charity or kindness. It is ridding myself of you forever. Because along with this money comes a document." "What document?" Clarissa asked, confused. Henry took a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Divorce petition," he said. "It's already filled out, only lacks your signature. You're going to sign now, in front of witnesses. You will accept all fault for the end of the marriage, will ask for nothing of my property, will renounce any right. In exchange, you take the $100 and we never see each other again." Divorce was a rare thing in 1933, scandalous, religiously condemned. But it existed for extreme cases of proven adultery, and Henry had all the proof he needed. Clarissa looked at the document, at the money, at Henry. She had no choice, and both knew it. "If I don't sign," she asked without real hope, "you get nothing and still face a lawsuit for theft," Henry answered. "I have all the records of the money you siphoned, witnesses, evidence. I can put you in jail if I want. So choose. Sign and go away with money, or refuse and go away with nothing and still sued." Clarissa took the pen he offered, signed the document with shaking handwriting. Teddy entered at that moment, accompanied by the village preacher, both serving as witnesses. They signed the document confirming they saw Clarissa accept the terms freely. The preacher looked at her with clear disapproval but said nothing. When everything was signed and recorded, Henry folded the paper, put it away carefully. "Done," he said. "You are no longer my wife. You have no connection to me anymore. You can go." Clarissa stood up with difficulty, legs numb from kneeling so long. She took the suitcase, put the envelope with money inside, walked to the door with uncertain steps, then stopped looking back one last time. Marianne was standing beside Henry now, not touching him, but close enough to show a bond. She was beautiful in a way Clarissa would never be. Beauty that came from a good soul, from a generous heart, from solid character. Henry deserved someone like that, Clarissa realized. Deserved a woman who loved him for real, who valued the man he was, not just the money he had. And she had wasted 12 years of his, 12 years he would never get back. "I'm sorry," Clarissa said with final sincerity. "Not for being caught, not for facing consequences, but for having been such an empty and petty person that she caused pain to a man who never deserved it." Henry just nodded, a cold farewell that made clear that apologies changed nothing. Clarissa left the house, crossed the flowered garden, passed through the wooden gate. Night had fallen completely, stars shone in the moonless sky. She began the long walk back to the village, but this time it wasn't a return home. It was a definitive departure, leaving behind a life she ruined with her own hands. Inside the Victory House, Henry returned to the table where dinner waited. Marianne watched him with eyes that showed worry and curiosity. "Are you all right?" she asked with a soft voice. Henry took her hand, pressed his lips to the calloused fingers with genuine affection. "I'm better than I've been in years," he answered with honesty. "Finally closed a door that I should have closed a long time ago." "Marianne," he said then, "I know we've known each other for only 2 months. I know it's early, that maybe it's sudden. But when you find the right person, you feel it. And I feel with you what I never felt in my life. When the divorce is finalized officially in a few months, would you accept to marry me?" Marianne stood still for a moment, eyes filling with tears. Then she smiled with a joy that lit up her whole face. "Yes," she answered. "1,000 times yes. I don't care if the house is big or small, if you are rich or poor. I care that you are an honest man, hard-working, fair. That is worth more than any fortune." They kissed right there in the dining room, Mrs. Higgins watching from the kitchen door with the satisfaction of someone seeing justice being done. Teddy, who was still there, witnessing everything, smiled at his brother, happy to see him finally finding peace and true love. The following months passed, bringing changes. The divorce was finalized in June of 1933, a quick process because Clarissa had confessed everything and contested nothing. Henry and Marianne married in August in a simple ceremony at the village church, just close family and true friends. She wore a white dress she sewed herself. He wore a new suit, but without exaggeration. The party was at the Victory Estate, with abundant food prepared by Mrs. Higgins, and music played by the field hands themselves. Marianne brought new life to the house. She woke up early to help Henry with the crops, cooked beside Mrs. Higgins, learning old recipes, tended the chickens and the garden, received neighbors with genuine hospitality. At night, she sat with Henry on the porch talking about the day, making plans for the future, laughing at simple jokes. The house that was silent and cold with Clarissa filled with warmth and laughter with Marianne. Henry never reversed all the fake land sales. He discovered he preferred a smaller property he could manage personally beside his wife, without needing an overseer or so many employees. He kept 150 acres, gave the rest back to Teddy as a gift for the support during the whole plan. His brother used the land to expand his business, creating his own farm where he raised cattle. The story of the farmer who pretended to be poor to unmask a gold-digging wife spread through the region and beyond. It became a legend told on front porches, an example used by fathers advising sons about marriage, a tale that people retold, modifying details but keeping the essence. Henry Vance became a symbol of the underestimated man who was smarter than everyone thought. As for Clarissa, she disappeared from the region. Some said she went to New Orleans to try a new life. Others swore they saw her in Tennessee married to an elderly widower. There were those who said she opened a boarding house in a small town, living modestly and honestly, finally learning the value of work. The truth no one knew for sure, and Henry never sought to find out. For him, Clarissa ceased to exist the day she signed the divorce. In March of 1934, a year after that night when Clarissa came back begging for help, Marianne gave birth to a son, a healthy boy with strong lungs who filled the house with cries and life. Henry held his son in his arms with a tenderness that surprised even himself, feeling a love he didn't know he was capable of feeling. "This is a real new beginning," he said to Marianne, who rested in bed with a tired but happy smile. "Our family, our life, our future built on truth, not lies." Mrs. Higgins lived to see 3 more grandchildren born in the following years. She died in peace at 68, surrounded by the family she helped raise, knowing she was leaving Henry in the right hands. She was buried in the village cemetery on a rainy autumn afternoon, and Henry cried genuine tears for the woman who was more of a mother than his own. Teddy married too, to a schoolteacher from the village, and had children who played with their cousins at the Victory estate on Sundays. The 2 brothers remained close until old age, accomplices of a secret that only they knew completely, witnesses to each other's strength. The 1930s were difficult for America with the Depression and economic crises, but Henry kept the farm prosperous through honest work and careful management. He never became extremely rich, but had enough to live with dignity and comfort, to educate his children, to help neighbors in difficulty. And he discovered that this moderate prosperity, built with his own effort, was worth more than any fortune. Marianne aged beautifully, hair turning grey, but the smile remaining illuminated, hands remaining calloused from work, but also soft with affection. She and Henry became that type of couple people point to as an example, true partners who built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. When Henry was 60 years old, already grandfather to 7 grandchildren, he was sitting on the porch on a golden summer afternoon. Marianne was beside him, rocking in the rocking chair, knitting a sweater for the youngest grandchild. The grandchildren ran through the yard, chasing chickens, childish laughter filling the air. Henry looked around at the farm he had rebuilt, at the family he had created, at the peace he had found. "Do you regret it?" Marianne asked suddenly. "The plan, the revenge, everything you did with Clarissa?" Henry thought for a long moment before answering. "I don't regret exposing the truth," he said finally. "She was a liar and a thief, and deserved to be unmasked. But I regret having let that consume so much of my time and energy. I should have simply kicked her out when I discovered the betrayal, moved on faster. The revenge was satisfying, but it didn't bring me happiness. You brought me happiness." Marianne stopped knitting, looked at him with those brown eyes full of simple wisdom. "Happiness doesn't come from destroying other people," she said softly. "It comes from building good things, from loving and being loved, from living with truth. You learned that, Henry, and that is why you have peace now." He took her hand, interlaced fingers old and spotted by age but still strong. "You taught me that," he corrected. "Without you, I would have stayed bitter even after the revenge. You showed me there was a better life waiting, The sun set, painting the sky with impossible colors, gold and pink and purple mixing in a divine canvas. The shadows lengthened across the yard where the grandchildren still played. The smell of fresh coffee came from the kitchen, where his daughter-in-law prepared dinner. The sound of a cowbell announced hands returning from work in the fields. Everything was common, ordinary, absolutely perfect. Henry realized then that the true victory hadn't been unmasking Clarissa. It hadn't been the revenge executed to perfection. The true victory was that moment, that quiet afternoon, that life built on a solid foundation of honesty and true love. Clarissa had taken years from him, but she hadn't managed to destroy his capacity to rebuild, to love again, to be happy. And somewhere distant, maybe Clarissa had also found her peace. Maybe she had learned a painful but necessary lesson about the value of honesty, about the consequences of selfish choices, about the price one pays for betraying trust. Or maybe she hadn't learned anything and continued being an empty person, looking to fill the void with material things. Henry would never know, and he realized it didn't matter. Her story was no longer his problem. What mattered was that he had survived. He had planned, executed, and won. But more important than winning, he had moved on. He had opened his heart again, even after being betrayed. He had risked loving, even knowing that love can hurt. And he had been rewarded with a woman who was worth every cent Clarissa wasn't, with a family that filled the house with life and joy, with a peace that no money can buy. The lesson that remained wasn't about revenge. It was about reconstruction, about not letting bad people destroy your capacity to be a good person. About justice, yes, but also about forgiveness for oneself, about allowing oneself to move on, about building a new life on the ruins of the old. Henry Vance wasn't a perfect hero or a saint. He was a man who was hurt, who reacted with intelligence and hardness, who did justice the way he thought right. But he was also a man who knew when to stop, when to let the anger go, when to embrace the happiness that appeared offering a second chance. And perhaps that is the true moral of this story that happened in rural Georgia in 1932 and 1933, that people will hurt you, betray you, use you, that you have the right to defend yourself, to seek justice, to not be a doormat. But in the end, the best revenge isn't destroying who hurt you. It is building a life so good, so full of love and meaning, that the person who betrayed you becomes nothing more than a footnote in your story. A small, bad chapter in a book that continues and gets better and better. Henry died at 74, sleeping peacefully in the bed he shared with Marianne for 40 years. She was beside him, holding his hand when he took his last breath, and they say he was smiling. He was buried in the village cemetery on a sunny spring afternoon, and half the county attended the funeral. Not because he was rich or powerful, but because he was respected, because he had lived with integrity, because he had been a good neighbor, a good father, a good husband. On the simple granite tombstone, Marianne had engraved only, Henry Vance, 1884-1958. Beloved husband, devoted father, man of honor, lived with truth, loved with sincerity, rests in peace. There was no mention of Clarissa, of the scandal, of the famous revenge, because that didn't define who he was. Just a small part of a long and complete life. Marianne lived 9 more years, cared for by children and grandchildren, dying at 81, surrounded by the numerous family she and Henry created. She was buried beside him, the tombstones side by side as the lives had been, and the Victory estate continued in the family's hands, passing from generation to generation, prosperous and happy. The story of the farmer who pretended to be bankrupt to unmask a gold-digging wife continued to be told, but with the years it changed, gaining layers, transforming into legend. Some focused on the revenge, others on the love that came after, others still on the lesson about character and consequences. Each person who heard it took a different meaning, saw a different mirror for their own choices and values. And perhaps that is the reason why stories like this endure through generations. Not because they are simple tales of good versus evil, but because they show human complexity in all its glory and misery. They show that people hurt and are hurt, that they make bad choices and suffer consequences, but also that they can start over, learn, grow. That we aren't defined by the worst moments or the greatest victories, but by the complete journey, by all choices summed up, by the legacy we leave. So next time you hear a similar story, of betrayal and revenge, of fall and reconstruction, remember that it isn't about who won or lost. It's about what we do after, about whether we choose to stay trapped in anger or move on to better things, about whether we let bad people destroy our capacity to trust again, or if we keep our heart open for true love when it appears, about whether we build a life on a foundation of truth or on the quicksand of lies. And thus ends the story of Henry and Clarissa, of Marianne and Teddy, of revenge and redemption, of end and new beginning. A story that began with betrayal on a New Year's Eve and ended with peace on a golden summer afternoon. A story that shows that sometimes the quietest man is the most dangerous, but also the most capable of forgiving himself and embracing new happiness. A story that, like all good stories, is a mirror where each one sees a different reflection depending on who they are and what they are looking for. And may we all, as Henry eventually did, choose to build instead of just destroy. Choose love instead of just anger. Choose a full life instead of a hollow victory. Because in the end, when the lights go out and the story ends, what matters isn't how many enemies we defeated, but how much love we created, how many lives we touched positively, how much peace we managed to find.